I want you to picture a Tuesday afternoon in October. The kind of afternoon where the light comes in low through the windows and everything feels like it's been placed there deliberately, like a set design for a life you always wanted but never quite believed you deserved. That was the afternoon I met Daniel. I was 31. I had come out of a long stretch of being alone. Not dramatically alone, not bitterly alone, just quietly, privately exhausted by the effort of waiting for something real. And then there he was. Tall. Careful with his words. The kind of man who remembered the small things. The way you take your coffee. The name of your sister's dog. The thing you mentioned once in passing that you didn't think anyone was listening to. We met at a work event. He was a consultant. I was a project manager. For the first 20 minutes, we argued politely about logistics software, and by the end of the night, he had asked for my number with a smile that I replayed in my head for 3 days. The first few months were exactly what people mean when they say they found their person. He was present in a way I hadn't experienced before. He cooked on Sundays. He left notes on the kitchen counter, not love letters, just little observations, little jokes, little proofs that he had been thinking about me even when I wasn't in the room. I felt seen. I felt chosen. I felt safe. We moved in together after 10 months. His things blended into mine so naturally that I couldn't remember, later, what the apartment had looked like before him. That is the thing about people who are good at infiltrating your life. They don't announce themselves. They just become the furniture. He was the kind of man who made you forget to be careful. And I was the kind of woman who mistook that for love. There was only one thing. One subject that lived in a glass box between us, sealed and untouchable. Children. I brought it up naturally, the way you do when you're building a life with someone, not as a demand, just as a conversation. And every single time, something changed in him. The air in the room shifted. He would smile, but the smile didn't reach his eyes. He would say something like, someday, or we're not ready yet, or let's just enjoy this for now. And then he would change the subject so smoothly, so warmly, that I almost forgot I had asked at all. I told myself it was fear. Men are afraid of commitment, I thought. Men are afraid of permanence. I gave him the benefit of every doubt I had. I gave him all of them. It didn't happen all at once. That's the thing I need you to understand. The unraveling of something that felt real never happens all at once. It happens in increments so small that you question your own perception before you question the other person. It started with the phone. Daniel had always been open with his phone, or at least he had always given the impression of openness, which I now understand is not the same thing. But somewhere around month 14 of us living together, the phone became a different object. It was always face down on the table. It was always taken into the bathroom. It buzzed at odd hours, and when I looked over, he was already reaching for it before the second vibration. I noticed once that a thread had been deleted. I know what a deleted conversation looks like. A gap in the timestamp sequence, the way the list skips like a missing stair. I said nothing. I told myself I was being paranoid. I told myself this is what surveillance looks like when you're afraid, and I didn't want to be that woman. Then came the distance. Not a dramatic withdrawal. Nothing I could point to and say, here, this is the moment it began. It was more like a slow dimming. He was home, but somehow he wasn't entirely there. He laughed at the right moments, responded at the right moments, held me at night like nothing had changed. But there was a lag, a fraction of a second between my words and his reaction, as though part of him was always elsewhere, always processing something I had no access to. The small lies began. Little things. He said he had been in a meeting when his location showed him at a part of the city I didn't recognize. He said he was at the gym on a Saturday morning when I bumped into his colleague, who mentioned they hadn't seen him all week. Each lie was minor enough to dismiss. Together, they were building something I didn't yet have the courage to name. I remember lying awake one night listening to him breathe, thinking, what is on the other side of this? What is the shape of what I don't know? I stared at the ceiling and I thought about the children conversation. Every time I had brought it up, every time he had deflected. And for the first time, a different kind of question formed in my mind. Not why doesn't he want children, but why is he so practiced at changing the subject? What would you have done in my place? Would you have kept quiet, afraid of what the answer might be? Or would you have pushed until the silence finally broke? Tell me in the comments, because I've asked myself that question 1,000 times.
It was a Saturday in March.
That detail is precise in my memory, the exact quality of the light, the smell of the morning, the coffee going cold on the counter. Daniel had gone out early. He said he had errands. I had a headache and I stayed home in my robe, moving slowly through the apartment, half reading, half watching television, thinking about nothing in particular. His laptop was open on the kitchen table. I don't know why I looked. I have replayed this moment so many times and I still can't tell you if it was instinct or accident or something darker, some part of me that had already done the math and just needed the evidence to catch up. I sat down. The screen was still unlocked, and there, in the center of it, was an open browser tab. A Facebook profile. A woman named Simone. Profile photo. A woman with dark hair, late 20s, smiling at something outside the frame. And beside her in the photo, a child. A small boy, maybe 5 or 6 years old, with curly hair and enormous dark eyes that I felt, even then, even in that first terrible second, I recognized. I clicked. I know I shouldn't have. I know what that word means in the context of privacy and boundaries and all the civilized arguments about trust. I clicked because my hands moved before my mind could stop them, and because some part of me had already understood what I was looking at. The messages were there. Hundreds of them. Over years. There were photographs of the child growing. Birthday photos. First day of school photos. A small boy blowing out candles while Daniel stood behind him with his hand on the child's shoulder, wearing an expression I had never once seen him wear in front of me. An expression that was unmistakable.
Pride.
Ownership.
Love.
There were arguments, too. Simone asking why he hadn't told me. Simone asking when he planned to come clean. Simone saying she was tired of this arrangement, tired of the lies, tired of being a secret. And Daniel, patient, practiced Daniel, managing her with the same careful warmth he had always used on me. Keeping her in place. Keeping me in place. Keeping everything perfectly, surgically separate. I sat at that kitchen table for a very long time. I don't remember moving. I don't remember breathing. I remember the coffee going completely cold. I remember reading the same message 4 or 5 times, each time hoping the words would rearrange themselves into something that made sense, something survivable. They didn't. He had a son. A 5-year-old son with dark curly hair and his exact eyes. A child he had been visiting, loving, raising, in secret, while he told me he wasn't ready to talk about the future. The child's name was Luca. I was still sitting at the table when he came home. I heard his key in the lock. I heard the specific rhythm of his footsteps, the way he always paused just inside the door to hang his jacket. Sounds I had lived with for years. Sounds that now felt like evidence of a person I had never actually known. He walked into the kitchen and he saw me. He saw the laptop. He saw my face. And in that moment, just before he composed himself, just before the practiced calm settled back over his features, I saw something flicker behind his eyes. Not guilt, exactly. Something more controlled than guilt. Calculation. I can explain, he said. He sat down across from me, and he began to talk. And what I learned, in the hour that followed, was that Daniel was extraordinary at making his betrayal sound like a burden he had been quietly carrying for my sake. He said he hadn't known how to tell me. He said he was afraid of losing me. He said Simone was in his past, that things with Luca were complicated, that he had been trying to figure out the right way to bring it into our life. He framed every lie as a form of protection. He made the secret sound like a sacrifice. I asked him how old Luca was. He said 5. I did the arithmetic quietly in my head while he was still talking. Luca was conceived during our first year together. I had been asking about children during our first year together. I had been told we weren't ready. When I said this out loud, something shifted in him. The warmth pulled back. He became precise, careful, slightly cold. He said I was making it about me. He said I was catastrophizing. He said I had always been too sensitive about the children subject, and that perhaps if I hadn't put so much pressure on him, things would have unfolded differently. He looked at me with an expression of patient concern, as though I were the one being unreasonable. that was the moment I understood what had been done to me. Not just the deception, but the architecture of it. The way he had used my own desire for children as a lever, making me feel demanding for wanting something ordinary. The way he had made me feel unstable every time I sensed something was wrong. The way he had, for years, been quietly training me not to trust my own instincts. I remember going to the bathroom and looking at myself in the mirror for a long time. I looked the same. I looked like the woman who had been happy here in this apartment, in this life, 3 days ago. I had no idea how to reconcile those two women, the one who had felt safe, and the one who was looking back at me now. He didn't raise his voice. He never raised his voice. He just kept speaking calmly, reasonably, patiently, until I felt like I was the one who had done something wrong. I slept on the couch that night. Or rather, I lay on the couch and waited for the night to end. If you've stayed with me until here, thank you. I mean that with everything I have. The ending is close. What came after was the hardest part, and the most necessary. I want to tell you that I left immediately, that I packed a bag that very night, walked out with my head high, and never looked back. That is the version of this story that feels cleanest. It is not the version that is true. The truth is that I stayed for another 3 weeks. Not because I had forgiven him. Not because I believed the things he said in the days that followed, the apologies, the promises, the careful reconstructions of the narrative that always somehow left him looking more like a man who had made a mistake than a man who had made a choice. I stayed because the apartment was ours and I didn't know yet where to put myself. I stayed because leaving meant that it was real. I stayed because grief is not logical, and because I was not ready to become someone whose life had included this. I left on a Wednesday morning while he was at work. I took only what was mine, which turned out to be less than I thought. When you spend years building a life around another person, it becomes genuinely difficult to remember which parts of the life belong to you alone. I stood in the middle of that apartment for a long time, touching things, deciding. I left the coffee maker. I left the throw blanket we had bought together in Portugal. I left the photograph on the refrigerator of the two of us on New Year's Eve, smiling at something I can no longer remember. I took my clothes, my books, the small ceramic bowl my mother had given me, and I left. The weeks that followed were the quietest of my life. I moved into a short-term rental, a small, white, anonymous room, and I learned what it feels like to rebuild the architecture of your daily existence from scratch. The silence was enormous. It was also, eventually, something I stopped trying to fill. I thought about Luca often. That little boy with his father's eyes, growing up in the middle of a situation that was never his fault, never his construction. I felt, and still feel, a complicated kind of grief for him, for the confusion that must live in a child who belongs to a secret. I hope he is well. I hope someone is protecting him from the weight of all the things the adults in his life could not figure out how to say. I've been asked, by friends, by my sister, by the therapist I began seeing 4 months after I left, whether I was angry. The honest answer is yes. But the anger was not what I expected. It wasn't loud. It didn't want to break things. It was more like a cold clarity, a slow, cellular rearrangement of everything I had been willing to overlook in the name of believing in something that turned out not to be true. What I understand now is this. A person who can look into your face day after day and maintain a parallel life with total composure, that person is not afraid of commitment. They are afraid of being known. And no amount of love can fill the space between someone and the truth they are protecting. I don't tell this story because I am still broken by it. I tell it because I know there are people listening who are lying awake right now, counting the inconsistencies, making excuses for the silences, convincing themselves they are too sensitive. I tell it because the version of me who needed to hear this story never got to hear it, and that woman deserved better. You are not paranoid. You are not too much. You are not imagining it. Trust the part of you that already knows. It has been 2 years. I am in a different apartment now, mine, entirely mine. I drink my coffee slowly in the morning, and I do not apologize for taking up space. I am not the woman I was before Daniel. I am also not the woman I was when I left. I am something that was built in the space between those two versions of me, out of honesty and time, and a very long, very quiet reckoning with what I am actually worth. I am still learning. I suspect I always will be. If this story reached you, if any part of it felt familiar, or necessary, or true, leave a comment. Tell me where you are in your own story. And if you haven't subscribed yet, do it now. Because the next story is already waiting, and it is just as real as this one.